despite the fact that the name Kids Behind Bars is actually very misleading, this documentary is very interesting and I did thoroughly enjoy it. And initially I wanted to watch it because I thought it was about, believe it or not, kids behind bars, juvenile detention centres, that kind of thing. It's not, but the premise is still really interesting. It's about individuals who committed crimes as children, and years later it was decided that it's actually unconstitutional to give a life sentence for that crime. They can still get the life sentence, but they need to be retrialed with a different perspective. So these individuals are facing a trial for crimes they committed when they were younger. Some of them have been in prison for a long time, and they may be getting retrialed for release. And there's one case in particular, which I won't go into any detail about just now, but at the end of the video I will, because it very, very emotionally moved me, where she had been accused of this crime but hadn't actually been imprisoned and wasn't even aware that she was being considered as a suspect until many years later. So that was an anomaly, but for the most part, these are individuals who have been in prison since they were children. And just to kind of further that misleading aspect, not only is it not about children behind bars, but these so-called child criminals are basically verging on adults. I think the youngest was 13 at the time, but mostly these crimes have been committed by 15, 16, 17-year-olds. So yes, technically children, but certainly adults who should know better. So really the title is misleading. I guess I'll get the other negative thing out of the way, and then I'll talk more about the documentary format and the things I enjoyed. This is ridiculously repetitive. And by that I mean they use the same interview clips over and over again. Not just in the way that most do, where they maybe start with a teaser clip and then the full interview clip will appear later on. This is just reusing the same clips of the same people saying the same thing. And even worse than that is that they repeat the same information from different people. So one person might say, he was driving very fast and he was drunk. That's a complete made up example. And then a split second later, somebody else would say, because he was drunk while he was driving very fast. So even though each episode is a decent length of, just under an hour, there's a lot of repetition, and each one really could have been cut down to half an hour without losing any of the information or any of the emotion. So it's really poorly edited. It really is very badly edited, and it's very misleading in terms of the title. And despite all that, I really enjoyed it. So it's obviously something that I could get past, because it's really interesting to see. Often, because a lot of these individuals have been in prison for quite a long time, some of them 20 up plus years, it's interesting to see how they have changed as individuals and how they are now a lot more remorseful for something they did. And, it does have a purpose, because not only are they much older now and we can see how prison has affected them, but there are also individuals, for some of the cases, speaking about how obviously the younger brain is not fully developed. Children are not appreciative of the consequences of their actions a lot of the time. And that's not to say that they shouldn't be held accountable, but that they shouldn't be given a life without parole sentence as an adult would, because they're not as fully aware of their actions. While that's factually correct, I still think a 15-year-old knows that it's wrong to shoot somebody in the face or whatever. So it's a bit of an awkward one, and I think that's what makes this pretty powerful, because it's so difficult to ascertain whether or not they should be tried as adults, because it's obviously a very, very adult crime. Most of these are murder. I think one, maybe two off the top of my head were not, but they were still really serious crimes, of course. Most of them were individual crimes, but some of them had multiple accomplices. And it does kind of make you think, well, first of all, you committed murder, you should go to jail. The other thing as well is I do not believe in life without parole. I think the purpose of prison is not just to punish, but it's to rehabilitate. Because what's the point in holding somebody in a cell for 50 years? We are not God. We do not get to make that decision. We do not get to take somebody's life away, which is what you're doing, even if they're alive. So instead of just punishing somebody, because everybody needs some kind of punishment for that. Help them, reform them, make them a good person where possible. Let them have parole, let them go back into the community and, do a lot of ex-convicts do talks and lectures, and they help vulnerable young adults who may go on to crime and things. And that's a really positive thing. And you can see certainly that some of these inmates could definitely go on to that kind of thing, and they could have really brilliant careers. And obviously in those cases, it's very easy to think, well, I hope with the retrial they get released. And we get to see their trials, we get to see a lot of the time the verdict being announced. And actually with a lot of them, when the verdict was announced, regardless of which way it went, because obviously sometimes it went in their favour, I will be honest, sometimes it didn't. I won't say which is which. The facial expressions were not as severe as I thought in either way. And I just think years and years in prison mean that they've been kind of conditioned to suppress emotion. And that's really unhealthy. And I think that that's kind of brutal. And obviously a lot of these conditions that they're in are horrific. There are two that affected me the most. One I'm going to talk about in a little bit of detail towards the end. One, I will just say, the case of Crystal really moved me, really shocked me. I really just couldn't get over how that concluded. And that made me so angry at the jurors. And this, I don't have a solution or an alternative, but I just think a jury does not work. And shows like this prove it. And from now there will be spoilers, because I'm going to tell you why having a jury doesn't actually solve anything. So, spoilers from now. The case that moved me the most was a case wherein somebody had been given, originally, life without parole for the murder of an individual, but this person never pulled the trigger. They were with, I believe, two other people, and one of the people shot and killed somebody else. And fair enough, that person deserves life, at least with parole. But Preston, the individual who is accused of this and sentenced, never murdered him. Yes, you could argue he is an accomplice, but how would you deserve life without parole for being in the wrong place at the wrong time? He didn't murder anybody. He didn't physically hurt anybody. Technically, he didn't do any wrong. I mean, there was an attempted robbery. That's obviously a bad thing, but the sentencing for that's not quite as severe as murder. And that really, really infuriated me, because when he would have been sentenced way back when, I'm not going to tell how that resentencing concluded, but when he was sentenced originally, why would you give a 17-year-old life without ever actually, he didn't do anything wrong in terms of murder. He went down for murder. He didn't kill anybody. He didn't touch anybody. He didn't touch that actual murder weapon at that actual time. And I don't understand, how does that make any sense? If I was on that jury, and as long as that information was presented to me like that, I most certainly wouldn't have said guilty. Not guilty of that specific crime. And that just proves why, to me, juries just don't always work. And I have no alternative solution, of course, but it's a flaw. So regardless of the issues with this, and the issues seem to be pretty big, it's very misleading title, it's very poorly edited, the children in this weren't really even children at the time. It's still enjoyable. It's really thought-provoking. If you're interested in true crime documentaries, and particularly ones with a twist, because this is obviously about retrials, and I also will say, while I feel a lot of these individuals could be reformed, they could be rehabilitated, there were one or two who I just thought, if you let that person out, they will reoffend. And in those instances, I was praying for another conviction. But for the most part, I feel like a lot of these are people who are changed, good people, and it's very easy to become very passionate about their cases when you watch this. I think it's something you'll really enjoy. I watched it on Crime and Investigation on Amazon Prime. Wish the series was longer. Really is very good, minus the flaws. One that I would happily recommend.